Hey everyone, welcome to another Patreon topic video. This one is for NElectron, and it's a topic that I have selected to discuss, and it's one that I've been wanting to talk about for quite a while, and I think will be very relevant to what is happening on my channel very soon, as you will see. So the topic I want to discuss is that I feel that the subgenres of rail shooters, beat 'em ups, and running guns should be adopted, or at least considered adopted, into our ecosystem of shooting games. So when I talk about adopting these games, I want to clarify that I'm not saying that we melt them into the classification of a shmup. We don't just say, okay, now they're all shmups. It's the same thing as Battle Grega and Dodonpachi and all those sorts of things. What I'm saying is that these subgenres share a player base with our own player base. In fact, in the last Callus Cup, or one before, there was Metal Slug in it, and other rail shooter type games, or like that G.I. Joe was kind of a rail shooter type game, or Metal Slug's run and gun. So these subgenres definitely seem to share DNA with shmups, and I think that's pretty hard to deny. The arcade roots, the focusing on scoring, all those sorts of things. But for some reason, we've never fully brought them in and kind of made a home for them. So if you go on the farm, if you go other places and you say, hey, I want to post my Metal Slug score, or you want to post this or that, as far as I'm aware, your Star Fox 64 score, as far as I'm aware, that is not accepted because they are not shmups as we understand them. However, I do in this video want to make my case for why I think we need to kind of open up our minds a little bit and start accepting people through these subgenres for a variety of reasons, and kind of bringing them in to where we're not calling them shmups, but we're setting up a place for them to be, a place for them to come together, to share player bases with, to value their scores, value their gameplay, those types of things. So let's begin by just talking about how these subgenres differ from shmups, and why in many threads across the internet you've read why a rail shooter is not a shmup. In fact, I think I saw a thread about that on Reddit the other day where someone was asking, are rail shooter shmups? And I've seen that on the forum a few times. So, in my opinion, and I think in many other players, rail shooters are not traditional shmups, right? Because of their 3D aspects, right? Because they take place in the dimension of, not just horizontal and vertical, but also in depth, whatever you want to call that. So, personally speaking, yes, I don't consider rail shooters traditional shmups. However, I do consider them very closely related to the shmup genre, because I basically consider them the 3D evolution of a shmup. If you're going to stick a shmup in 3D, it becomes a rail shooter. Kind of like Mario 64 and Super Mario World, right? Mario 64 is not a 2D platformer, and so 2D platformer players aren't going to consider Mario 64 the same genre. However, it is a 3D platformer, and there is that connection is shared. People recognize, okay, these are both the same genre, sort of, right? They're just 3D and 2D elements. However, there's kind of this weird disconnect where, even though it's pretty easy to see that rail shooters are the 3D version of shmups, we just kind of ignore that fact, I guess. And I think it's actually sad what has happened to rail shooters, because they basically were dead on arrival, right? They had a little bit of a boom there, the early Polygon days, kind of the early days where we're experimenting with 3D graphics and 3D games in an arcade setting, fighting games, 3D fighters, all that kind of stuff. But then as we start establishing 3D games as home console games, the rail shooters, the PS3, PS4, that era, they just disappear pretty much, right? It's only really the PS1, PS2, whatever, Xbox, whatever console you want to think of, those early-ish the 64, of course, the early-ish era of 3D graphics that these genres exist. And so one thing I think would be basically they're dead in the water is what I'm getting at. And if you play a rail shooter such as Star Fox 64 or Star Fox Zero, maybe even Panzer Dragoon, right? You play a rail shooter, where do you go? Like, where's the home for these games? It's not the Star Fox Reddit, I'll tell you that much, because I posted my Star Fox video there, and the Star Fox Reddit's more about like fandom for the franchise and things like that. They're not really concerned. There's some high score talk on there, but you know what I'm saying? There's no real home for these games. And I feel like shmup players, we're the place. Like, we would be where you would go. If you're going to post your Star Fox 64 high score, it would be somewhere like the shmup scene, right? Same thing with run and guns. I know run and guns kind of just have their own little whatever. They kind of just are in the arcade, like Twin Galaxies area. But I feel like run and guns actually belong more with the shmup people than with the Donkey Kong people. And the reason why, especially run and guns, I mean, if you want to dismiss rail shooters, which I don't think you should, and you want to dismiss beat 'em ups, which again I don't think you should, but if you want to dismiss those, I still think run and guns have a really solid case for being part of the shmup scene, because they are basically the bridge between platformers and shoot 'em up games. They are very important to the health of our community, or whatever you want to call it, health of our player base, I guess is what I'm saying. Because myself, for example, got into shmups via run and guns, because run and guns, again, they cater towards the majority of players, because most players have experience with 2D platformers thanks to Nintendo and all their great 2D platformers. So then you stick a gun in their hands and you have them start dodging bullets and having them start dodging patterns like a Metal Slug, and all of a sudden they're starting to creep closer to shmups, and then those skills are starting to translate over. It's like a nice transitionary genre between platformers and shmups. And so I think we benefit greatly by recognizing them more and by embracing them more. And like I said, I've seen run and guns in Callus Cup, and pretty much every shmup player I know plays run and guns. I'm sure there's some who don't, but the majority of us do play run and guns and enjoy them. So I think that's one thing I want to just talk about, is I think we should start making a bit of more of a home for these genres. Same thing with beat 'em ups, because the beat 'em up, okay, so run and guns are bringing you in from the platformer side of things. I think beat 'em ups can actually bring people in via the fighting game side of things, right? Where beat 'em ups are kind of the bridge genre between a shmup and a fighting game, where it has sort of fighting game type mechanics, but then it also has shmup type mechanics. And so, again, that's another great hybrid genre that I think would benefit if we brought them in and started saying, okay, beat 'em ups, shmups, power in numbers, right? Because the funny thing about the shmup player base is that we're pretty eclectic, to be honest. We're not that focused, and the player bases that are really focused, like Toho, are at this point off doing their own thing, and the just wider shmup scene, we have a large variety of tastes, and some shmups, games that we consider shmups, are right in that line between the other subgenres, but they just barely fall on the side of shmup. Like that G.I. Joe game we're playing in Callus Cup. That thing is so close to being a rail shooter. It's like right on the edge. And in fact, it's hard to even say that Star Fox on the Super Nintendo, I mean, it's so close to being a shmup at this point, because yes, it's in the 3 dimensions, but you're just aiming in the 3 dimensions. No, it doesn't have that all range mode type thing like Star Fox 64 does, where it really opens up to being a flight sim type game. Like Star Fox on the Super Nintendo is barely 3D, basically. So, and I'm trying to think, there is there's a really good Sega Genesis game. If it comes to me, I'll remember. You played in Shenmue. If it doesn't come to me, I will show a picture of it right now on the video. But anyway, there's this great Sega game where it's basically Star Fox Super Nintendo, but it's not true 3D. It's like more Mode 7, type graphics, but that's considered a shmup, right? Because what else would you classify it? And so I think we're getting a little too picky with the lines of what's a shmup, what's not a shmup. I think the much more important aspect is not, oh, is that 3D? Oh, is that 2D? Is that guy walking? Is he flying? You know, is the movement platformery movement, or is the movement more, 8-way shmup style movement? I think those things are all good to classify and subclassify things, but I think the larger picture that we need to start paying attention to is, what is the goal of the game? If the goal of the game is a high score, and the way you achieve that is very shmup-like, where you are, having to grind out routes, you're having to optimize, you're having to play for survival versus score, all those types of things. To me, that's the larger picture where we should start saying, okay, if you're really playing the game for a high score, and it has enough shmup-like elements, so Donkey Kong, right? You play Donkey Kong for a high score, Pac-Man for a high score, but it doesn't have those core shmup elements of dodging, routing, and stuff. But Metal Slug kinda does, right? Like, and especially some of the later Metal Slug games where you're straight up shmupping in some of the levels, but Metal Slug, really, if your feet weren't stuck to the ground, it would basically be a shmup, right? And so, anyway, I'm not saying everything is a shmup if it has high scores, but I'm just saying is that I think we should be a little more open-minded to accepting and discussing games that are, running guns, beat-em-ups, and rail shooters, because I think it's going to be beneficial for everyone. Players of those games will have somewhere to go, they'll have a home, they won't be orphan genres anymore, and those games can also serve a function for shmup players to pull people in, right? To kind of ease them into our mechanics and into the way we play these games. So that's the topic I wanted to discuss. You'll see why that's relevant to me, especially rail shooters. I have a real soft spot in my heart for rail shooters, and you're going to see more rail shooter stuff on this channel. Yeah, I mean, I'm not super strict with the content of this channel. I'm not locked into shmups only, but I feel like rail shooters, if those don't appeal to my core audience, it's like I'm going to do them anyway because I love them so much. So thanks so much for watching, and before I close out, I'd like to thank my patrons. So Jake Ryan, J Lab, Joe Angelo, K, Kino Tosi, Mark Sloan, Maz, Nathaniel Davis, NElectron, man of the video, Omcall, Psych, Plasmo, Rhizosis, Segumo, Young Money Swee, Dingo, Anthony A, Brian Shiver, Double Vision, Dunpeel 2064, Full Set, Retro Schmupper, Gus, Kiwi, and Jacob Spring. Thanks for watching.